Gracias por quedarse en esta pausa. Espero que hayan podido descansar para pasar a esta nueva conferencia a cargo de dos mujeres. Ellas son Annette em, Dortmund y Helen Williams. Así que estamos muy felices de contar con la participación de ellas. Voy a contarles quiénes son por si no las conocen, pero yo creo que claramente su trabajo antecede quiénes son ellas, así que estamos muy felices de contar con su participación. Annette Dortmund es consultora de OCLC y su trabajo se enfoca en las comunicaciones académicas y el papel de las bibliotecas en el apoyo de la investigación, los identificadores persistentes y los metadatos, de próxima generación. Por su parte, Helen Williams es especialista en metadatos de la London School of Economics and Political Science. Actualmente tiene la responsabilidad de las colecciones de la biblioteca y los metadatos de los resultados de investigación, con un enfoque estratégico en la gestión de metadatos para el descubrimiento. Les comentamos que esta conferencia estará en inglés, ya que es la lengua materna de Annette y Helen. Para quienes están en Zoom, nuestro público de Zoom, pueden escuchar la traducción simultánea. En su menú abajo está disponible un icono de un mundo y ahí tienen que hacer clic y escoger la opción de español. Le contamos que este servicio está solo disponible para la audiencia de Zoom y que en nuestro canal YouTube solamente se va a escuchar el idioma original. Así que le damos el pase a Annette y Helen. Les recordamos que las preguntas las pueden hacer por el chat y las pueden hacer también en Twitter usando el hashtag BiblioU2021. Y Helen y Annette también tienen cuentas en Twitter, son bastante activas, así que también pueden seguir la conversación por ahí. Helen, Annette, un gusto de conocerlas virtualmente y muchas gracias por estar con nosotros acá en el 7º Congreso de Bibliotecas Universitarias y Especializadas, con una audiencia de más de 680 participantes, así que ahí hay una gran audiencia latinoamericana esperando lo que nos tienen que decir. Les dejo a ustedes la palabra, muchas gracias y suerte.
Well, thank you very, very much for this introduction and for this opportunity to present at your conference. We're delighted to be here, aren't we, Helen?
We are, thank you.
So let me share my screen so we can get started. So in our presentation, and Helen, this is my presentation today, we would like to share with you some key trends that shape the current transition to the next generation of metadata. And then we'll also provide lots of very concrete examples for each of those areas from a very specific national context to illustrate those trends. This is what we have here for you today. I was introduced already, so I don't need to say much. I am Annette Dortmund. I'm a historian by training, but I've worked on topics related to next-gen metadata for the past years. And my co-presenter, Helen.
Yes, I've been introduced as well, but I work at the London School of Economics as the metadata manager.
Right. And we're both standing on the shoulders of a giant in metadata land. My former colleague, Karen Smith-Yoshimura at OCLC, who just recently retired. For 25 years, Karen has worked extensively on the metadata needed to describe and provide access to the multilingual resources managed by libraries, archives, and museums and other cultural heritage organizations. Her work also included identifiers and linked data. And as an OCLC research senior program officer, Karen has also for many years convened discussions among metadata managers within the OCLC Research Library Partnership, the so-called OCLC Research Library Partners Metadata Managers Focus Group, quite a mouthful, a transnational group of subject matter experts from 11 countries spanning 4 continents. And the rich Robust and sustained discussions of this diverse group over many years then formed the fundament for her final report, which you can see on the cover, which you can see on the screen here, an opus magnum, I would call it, transitioning to the next generation of metadata, which really is a meta-synthesis of the key trends that emerged from those discussions. It shines a light on the evolution of the next generation of metadata and offers clear direction for libraries. And Karen's report, of which my co-presenter Helen is also, as well as myself, reviewers, categorized the content in these 4 sections, which we are going to use to structure today's presentation. The transition to linked data and identifiers, describing inside-out and facilitated collections, evolution of metadata as a service, and then finally, preparing for future staffing requirements. And the structure of today's presentation is like this. I will briefly highlight some key takeaways from each of these sections in the report, which I obviously is recommended reading, and Helen will provide rich context and examples for each. So let's look at the context first. What is the problem and what are the main drivers for this transition to the next generation metadata? Quite simply, there is frustration given the state of current metadata. Format-specific metadata management based on curated text strings in bibliographic records understood only by library systems is nearing obsolescence, both conceptually and technically. Or to put it differently, traditional methods of metadata generation, management, and dissemination are not scalable and appropriate to an era of rapid digital change, rising audience expectations, and diminishing resources. This is how the British Library observes in their collection management strategy document. In short, the metadata could be better, there is not enough of it, and the metadata that does exist is not used widely outside the library domain. Something clearly needs to change. Helen, would you like to share your perspective?
Yes, thank you. In an introductory sense, I wanted to say that many of the trends that are identified in the report that Karen published were also discussed in the UK across a series of events that took place in 2019, titled The Future of Cataloguing. And so in drawing out the UK context today, I'm going to cover collections for metadata and research outputs with a focus on supporting our local communities and the wider world, and thinking about how our transition can contribute to the global web of data. It's going to be a whistle-stop tour from me today, so there will undoubtedly be some things that I don't cover and some inevitable bias to work at my own institution, but you will be aware of lots of work going on in your own areas, and I'd really encourage you to share that with each other. I think that we're stronger as professionals when we collaborate and support one another, and then we can also learn from each other as well. I'm going to mention loads of things in the course of the presentation, but links to everything that I mentioned today are at the end of our slides.
Right, so let's talk about the first of the 4 trends or sections, the transition to linked data and identifiers. A large part of the report really depicts the changes taking place in this transition to linked data and identifiers, in particular, the changing resource description workflows. From original cataloging to entity description, moving from copy cataloging to link management, moving from library authority control to vocabularies from many sources. In all the discussions over the years, metadata managers viewed persistent identifiers as crucial to transitioning from current metadata to future applications. One of the shifts underway is the one from authority control to identity management, and the value of identifier hubs such as Wikidata to aggregate identifiers pointing to the same entity, and also offering labels in different languages and writing systems. So in this example from the American poet Maya Angelou, you see just a sample of the 60 plus identifiers and name labels that the Wikidata has aggregated together, including those from the library domain. If compared to authority control, identity management poses a change in focus to describing entities and the relationships among them. Why is this relevant? To give one example, in 2017, OCLC Research conducted a survey on the topic of equity, diversity, and inclusion, EDI, and asked institutions in the Research Library Partnership, what areas have you changed or do you plan to change due to your institution's EDI goals and principles? In comparison to all the changes institutions had already made in their workflows to comply with their EDI goals and principles, metadata and library catalogs, that's our third from the left on the graph here, lag behind. Institutions were planning changes, but about a third only had already implemented changes. Now, the ability to link to multiple vocabularies with different labels, as indicated in the previous slide, is one promising approach to address language issues. And addressing language issues is important as libraries seek to develop relationships and build trust with marginalized communities.
In terms of the transition to linked data, on the whole, UK librarians have had less opportunities to be involved in the bigger kind of linked data projects that we follow in the United States. But there is a lot happening in the UK in the realm of identifiers, which, as Annette says, metadata managers identify as something absolutely crucial in the transition to linked data. The report mentions British Library work with publishers to add ISNIs to publisher metadata so that identifiers appear earlier in the supply chain. And BIC, the Book Industry Communication Body in the UK, have recently launched something called the Metadata Capabilities Directory. And we're hopeful that this representation of how metadata is used across the supply chain will show where we can work together to seed metadata with useful identifiers and to create more links. Persistent identifiers are the basis of one of the projects of Towards a National Collection, which is a major 5-year investment in the UK, which aims to bring collections together across institutional boundaries in the heritage sector using identifiers. Project Freya is something that's been running a bit longer. That's an EU-funded project with the British Library as a partner, and that aims to extend the infrastructure of persistent identifiers in open research by building a graph that will link persistent identifiers from different systems together to support the discovery of connections at least a couple of steps away. But we see from this that there's no single identifier that covers all use cases, and so there's still this need to support the creation of links and connections. And Annette mentioned Wikidata, and there's currently a lot of discussion around its potential as an identifier hub. So from a library and research perspective, think of bringing together identifiers such as ORCID, ISNI, Library of Congress, VIAF, Scopus, Microsoft Academic, Twitter, just to name a few. Personally, I'm really excited about the potential of Wikidata and the opportunities that it offers to mint unique identifiers for the entities in our resources, pulling our content into the linked open data ecosystem, and connecting it with unique identifiers from external knowledge systems. Google Knowledge Graphs, digital assistants such as Alexa and Siri, and Wikipedia info boxes are all harvested with content that's taken from Wikidata. So content that we can create in Wikidata from our libraries will begin to impact search engine results and create bridges across currently siloed domains to make library data more widely accessible and then enabling new connections and discoveries. So at LSE, where I work, I'm in the early days of creating experimental data models that we can use with Wikidata and working out how we can scale up some work to bulk upload our theses content to Wikidata. But there are other colleagues across the UK who have done an awful lot more work in this area. And so I just draw your attention to the National Library of Wales, who have presented on using Wikidata to improve access to data, to improve data quality, and to develop new tools and services for users. The University of Oxford have blogged about getting a whole variety of data sets onto Wikidata. And colleagues from Bristol and Leeds universities have co-authored an article recently about Wikimedia in universities. And Leeds have talked about their Wikidata learning and how they've drawn on the expertise of colleagues at the University of Edinburgh. And then from a slightly different angle, the Wellcome Institute have spoken about enriching their data with external content from sources such as Wikidata, so that they can then connect works, people, and concepts to improve search and discovery. As Annette has said, Wikidata is multilingual, and so it has the potential to address some areas of knowledge equity. And that's particularly important because, as Annette has noted, metadata in library catalogues is lagging behind in terms of institutional EDI goals and principles. There's been a lot of collaborative work between colleagues in the UK, the US, and Canada on the cataloguing code of ethics. And so that's another way that we're engaging with this issue at the moment.
So the second section in the report focused on specific challenges in describing both inside-out and facilitated collections. Inside-out collections being the collections with the unique materials created and curated by institutions. As on the topic of inside-out collections, the metadata managers' discussions always reflected the firm belief that metadata underlies all discovery, regardless of format, now and in the future. And the discussions covered a number of formats, such as archival collections, archived websites, audio and video collections, image collections, research data. Discussions on the image collections provided an opportunity to showcase the OCLC research works IIIF Explorer that allows people to retrieve images across different institutions and collections. And I encourage you to try it out. The link is shown on the slide. More specifically on research data, discussions revealed that libraries and especially metadata specialists were often not included in the earliest stages of the research lifecycle, but libraries' expertise in metadata standards, identifiers, linked data, and data sharing systems, as well as technical systems, can be invaluable to the research lifecycle. So there clearly are challenges and opportunities here in this area.
So thinking just briefly first about facilitated collections, in providing access to facilitated collections, I think we're all very aware of this tension between the timeliness of record provision and good quality description in those records. And last summer in the UK, the National Acquisitions Group prepared a report on the quality of shelf-ready metadata to encourage libraries and suppliers to work together to ensure fit-for-purpose metadata to support discovery and use. And we also have a National Bibliographic Knowledge Base in the UK, the NBK, and that's a piece of national bibliographic data infrastructure which, among other things, supports us in shared cataloguing. And the NBK supports the work of another UK-wide project called Plan M, where the M stands for metadata. And that's seeking to streamline the bibliographic ecosystem in the UK. And it's anticipated that one of the outcomes of this will be that the metadata associated with routine acquisition will be a solved issue, something that we can buy in without needing to edit, and that will allow us to focus on metadata for our unique and inside-out collections. At LSE, we have embarked on a piece of work that I've called Fit for Purpose Metadata, and that looks, among other things, at how we can increase reliance on externally supplied records in order to create the capacity to engage with digital scholarship and with linked data developments for our unique resources. Colleagues in our digital library team have been pushing unique content to various platforms, Google Arts and Culture, Flickr, Unsplash, and JSTOR Open Community Collections. And I've been looking at how we can link the content on these external platforms with the library via Wikidata. But working with unique content tends to mean that we're outside the realm of traditional library name authority files. And there's a project being run in the UK by the Archives Hub called the Names Project to explore how to process and match names to enable linking resources from different collections. Unique content also often means that we're working with the different formats that Annette has highlighted. And JISC, who provide digital services and solutions to the UK higher education sector, recently worked with LSE and with UCL, University College London, to explore using IIIF to ease cataloguing issues and bottlenecks in digitisation projects. And the University of Manchester have developed expertise with TEI to provide rich and contextual metadata for their digital collections. And research data is an emerging area of involvement for metadata colleagues. Last year at LSE, the metadata team carried out an audit of LSE datasets in external repositories to support our Research Excellence Framework submission. And elsewhere, I'm aware that metadata colleagues are sometimes involved in providing the metadata for internal research data repositories.
And we're changing context once again, evolution of metadata as a service. So metadata as a service refers to uses of metadata beyond describing materials. And this can lead to the development of new applications, an example of which is given on the left-hand side of the slide. This is a visualization of the distribution of Australian Aboriginal languages as represented in the Australian National Bibliographic Database. This is drawn from the language codes assigned. The photo on the right shows the decoration in the Hachette Publishers Group headquarters. The River of Authors, as it is called, is based on bibliometrics supplied by the British Library on Hachette's top authors represented in the British Library's catalogue. Indeed, a beautiful example, I think, of metadata visualization. Metadata as a service can also include metrics, consultancy, or semantic indexing.
So this evolution of metadata as a service brings new opportunities for involvement. And I think it's really important as metadata professionals that we are proactive in seeking those out. Last year at LSE, I began a piece of work to review and reprioritise the work of the team to ensure that we were supporting the changing needs of the library. And as a result of this, I've been seeking to reposition the team as a collaborative partner within the library, and also to think about how we can establish metadata as a primary output in its own right, not simply as a supporting feature of other library services. The lockdown in the UK last year had an unexpected impact on this, but nevertheless, we were able to increase our cross-team working with the research support team, the digital library team, and the online services team. And you can see some examples of the work that we undertook with each team on the slide on the screen. And longer term, I want us to look at collaborative partnerships to open up our metadata and expose it on the web, and consider how collection metadata might be useful for research. This idea of the catalogue as data is a culture shift that we are beginning to see more. And James Baker at the University of Sussex has blogged about the Legacies of Catalogue Descriptions project, looking at computational, critical, and curatorial analysis of collection catalogues. And Tim Hitchcock, who's also from the University of Sussex, gave a fascinating presentation at the Research Libraries UK 2019 conference about connecting scholars with bibliographic data for research.
So all these developments clearly have implications on the staffing requirements. And this generated lots of discussion among the metadata managers. A culture shift is needed from pride in production alone, how many records you can produce in a single day or in a month, to valuing opportunities to learn, explore, and try new approaches to metadata work. Other subtopics in this realm covered in the report are new tools and skills needed, self-education, and also addressing staff turnover.
Research Libraries UK have highlighted this culture shift that we're seeing. And one of the ways they've been doing that is through their manifesto for the digital shift in research libraries and their new digital shift forum. And in this environment with so much culture shift happening, it's vital that we not only know, but are also able to show how metadata links with and supports our library and institutional strategies. At LSE, we do this in the metadata team through a purpose tree, which it's a bit small, but you can see on the slides. And that shows where every piece of work that we're doing in the team, which is right at the bottom of the slide, where that fits into the library strategy, how it contributes to each of our library goals. And in turn, those are informed by institutional strategy. And flexibility is absolutely key so that metadata colleagues can support the wider work of the library. And I try to see where our metadata expertise can be valuable to other work across the library. So during the lockdown last year, colleagues in the metadata team were able to get involved in reviewing data management plans. And that's something that's then gone on to enrich their work in the metadata team, because it's given them visibility of an earlier part of the research process when they're used to working towards the end of it. We also need to be prepared to carry out process reviews and to seek out efficiencies in our workflows. And one of my team has been looking at how brief record rules in ALMA, which is our library management system, might help us to spend less time reviewing the metadata that we buy in for our teaching collections. And we're hopeful that, that through these new processes, we'll be able to shave 170 hours a year of the work that we're doing in that area. And we also need to look at where we need new skills. So another one of my team has been learning Python and has been able to put those new skills into practice by further automating our blog metadata and by automating some steps of some research support tasks as well. So time that we save in these ways can then be repurposed to new and developmental work, like the work I've described a little bit earlier with Wikidata. So my message as we navigate this culture shift in our libraries and transition to the next generation of metadata is don't be afraid to experiment. That's how we learn and develop new skills to support our profession in the global sharing of data.
Karen's report concludes with the observation that the next generation of metadata will become even more focused on entities rather than record-based descriptions of an institution's collections. The resulting impact of this will be global, affecting how librarians and archivists will describe the inside-out and facilitated collections, will inspire new offerings of metadata as a service, and further influence future staffing requirements. At OCLC, for example, work is underway to build a shared entity management infrastructure, and the focus group's expectation is that it will address many of the challenges documented in the report around persistent identifiers, especially providing language-neutral links to trustworthy sources. Another final key takeaway from all the discussions and from the report was good linked data requires good metadata. So if you today are a contributor to good metadata, thank you for doing this. Your efforts will greatly help create good linked data in the future. So this concludes our summary of key highlights from this really extremely rich and informative report. And as promised earlier, Helen has done a marvelous job of pulling together all those references that we referred to during the presentation. So thank you very, very much for this opportunity to present. And I think we still have some time for questions or discussion. We'd love to hear what you think and in how far what we talked about specifically resonates with you in your different regional settings.
Gracias, Annette y Helen. Fue una muy buena presentación, muy completa. Es un gran informe, así que esperemos que todos puedan tener acceso a él, lo puedan revisar, y gracias también por la recopilación de las referencias que siempre son tan útiles para que se puedan, que las personas puedan aprender más sobre los metadatos. Tengo algunas preguntas que hemos recopilado del chat y también de las redes sociales. Aprovechamos de invitar también a nuestra audiencia a seguirlas en Twitter, así que quizás tengan ahí una gran y una nueva audiencia latinoamericana. Ahí Annette y Helen nos pueden decir quién va a responder la pregunta, pero yo la voy a formular. La primera pregunta es fue recopilada del chat, perdón, y es, ¿consideran que formatos como el MARC dejarán de utilizarse a corto plazo? Esa es la pregunta. Gracias.
Well, as a historian, I'm happy to answer that one. I'm happy to answer that one. So, do I think it is going away anytime soon? No. Do I think that entities will become a lot stronger? Yes. Do I think that both will be with us for a while? Yes. So, if you remember, the coming of the codex did not immediately push the scroll away, and there are still scrolls today sometimes. So, in that sense, I think MARC is going to live much longer than some of us may want. But this doesn't mean that metadata isn't going to change very much and probably very soon. Helen, would you agree?
Yes, I would. I think that we're going to be living with MARC metadata for a long time. We've got millions of records in our library management systems collectively in MARC data. And while I agree with Annette that we will see changes going forwards, I also think that we'll be living with MARC data for a long time.
One might also say, just to add this, that wherever MARC solves a problem, why change it to anything else? And the new way of organizing metadata very often, as Helen pointed out in her many examples, helps us solve new problems.
Muchas gracias, Annette y Helen, por la respuesta. Se nos están acumulando todas las preguntas ahora y por eso vamos a hacer una fusión de algunas para que ustedes puedan responderlas. Liliana y Ruth nos preguntan y vamos a fusionar esas solicitudes en una. Ellas preguntan más o menos, ¿no? ¿Cuáles son las nuevas destrezas que deberían desarrollar los catalogadores para enfrentar este cambio digital? ¿Y cómo visualizan el nuevo rol del bibliotecario catalogador?
So I think one particular skill that we're finding we need a lot more of is to be able to manipulate large sets of data. So perhaps in the earlier days when I began my career in cataloguing, we were often creating a record one by one, for one book at a time. Whereas now the volume of metadata that we see is such that that we're trying to work with much bigger sets of data. So I think new skills, being able to use new tools like OpenRefine, MarcEdit, getting to grips with linked data, things like Wikidata. Those are some of the skill sets that I think we're beginning to see come online a lot more. Annette, do you have things to add on that?
I'd just like to refocus what you said earlier in your presentation, that flexibility is really one of those skills that is needed simply because job profiles are changing rapidly. and what we are seeing today and what we are going to see in a couple of years may be very different. So remaining flexible, I think, is also one of the top skills.
Yes, and I think we're no longer just one kind of discrete cataloguing team. I think I've referred to as well this need for cross-team working. I think there's much more of an emphasis on the library as a whole rather than discrete departments. So you want to know how metadata can contribute to the wider work of the library, and you want your team to be involved in as many different projects in the library as possible and bringing their metadata skills to bear on that.
Right, and if you're thinking of research support, you're even seeing embedded librarians who work in scientific teams. So yeah, lots of very different work models.
Muchas gracias por su respuesta. Es un desafío permanente, como ustedes dicen, y muy interesante para la misma profesión de los gestores de información. Y tenemos otra pregunta también del público, que es, ¿cómo es posible integrar, fusionar ontologías para la descripción de información, como las provenientes desde Open Linked Data, para una descripción más profunda de la información?
Could you repeat the question for us?
Sí, no hay problema, yo la repito. ¿Cómo es posible integrar, fusionar ontologías para la descripción de información, como por ejemplo las provenientes desde Open Linked Data, para así lograr una descripción más profunda de la información?
I think it's just catching up with the translation. I think the question is about how we can give a deeper level of description to our data. And I think I might go back to Wikidata here and looking at how we can, it has so many different statements that you can use to describe your information. So you're being able to get a much broader kind of picture of the data and add many more statements of description to it. And you're able to then link that to so many other identifiers and then other descriptive models and ontologies. So I think that gives a much deeper dive into the level of detail that you can provide. Annette, do you want to add anything?
Right, and based on my understanding of the question, looking at library resources, BIOF is one of those examples where a library resource is not only very strongly consumed in the library, in outside library, the library community, such as in Wikidata, but also including lots of those links to those hubs outside of the library community. So creating those links to library resources, but also outside to other is what's providing the richness, I think. And tools are emerging, although I'm not familiar with the names, tools are emerging to follow these links and visualize all those connections. And there are multiple examples of projects where this richness of the information that is generated by following those links is visualized and made transparent. Hoping this helps.
Gracias por la respuesta, Annette y Helen. Acá tenemos una pregunta, seguimos con las preguntas de Rosa Monfasani, y ella pregunta, ¿los metadatos pueden generar un vocabulario controlado de carácter mundial al estilo de los tesauros generales?
This is, I think, a question of about policies too. So from the equity, diversion, inclusion discussions, I know that authoritative vocabularies are viewed sometimes even with a critical eye, simply because labeling might be appropriate different labeling might be appropriate in different settings. And this is why in different communities, different labels and different vocabularies are needed to provide descriptions that are appropriate and not harmful, not offending. But at the same time, there is a need to link them up to make it to create those links between terms that may talk about the same person, for example, or the same entity, but using different labels. They may not always be same as relations. They may be, but so is there a need for an authoritative thesaurus? I think this is much discussed in the community, and there is a tendency that I see to rather focus on community-specific ones and then link them up. Helen, is that also your perspective on these things?
Yes, I think that's what we're seeing at the moment, and I think different communities do have different needs. So there is that need to have a community-specific focus, but also to be able to bring them together and link similar terms. I think that's very important too.
Gracias, Annette, también y Helen por la respuesta. Nuestra última pregunta es de Gilberto en Colombia y nos pregunta por un caso en específico, un caso que es algo que le suceda a él, pero también puede ser algo que sucede con otras personas. Y nos pregunta, ¿por qué los buscadores de Internet, y da como ejemplo a Google, Mozilla, Microsoft Edge, entre otros, cuando busco un título de un libro en una biblioteca universitaria en el mundo, ninguno de estos buscadores me ubica dentro de un catálogo bibliográfico? Gilberto dice que es usuario de worldcat.org y lo usa en sus clases con los estudiantes de bibliotecología.
So if I've understood the question properly, it's about why are you ending up getting results from WorldCat rather than specific libraries. And if I've understood correctly, then I think that would on the whole be because library catalogues and MARC data isn't something that that can be harvested or understood by the web. And so all that data that we've got, all that rich data is very much just for library catalogue kind of users and those unique to our institutions and not discoverable through a Google search. And that's why I think we're so keen to look at projects like Wikidata or other ways of getting linked data onto the web so that we can push that unique content out in a format that is readable to the World Wide Web and so makes our collections discoverable to a much broader range of users. Annette, do you have anything to add?
And right, and worldcat.org obviously was created to solve that problem and to create that intermediate step between searching on a search engine, but then also linking to a specific library collection. I think there is something you can do, at least in Google Scholar or such, where you can figure which institution you come from, and it will give you, it will tweak the results. But I'm not familiar enough with that to say more about this. I'm afraid, sorry.
Todo bien, no hay ningún problema. Les queríamos agradecer mucho, Helen y Annette, por estar con nosotros en esta audiencia de más de 700 participantes en Zoom. Ya están presentes para una audiencia latinoamericana, quizás más que antes. Esperamos y sabemos que su presentación fue muy útil. Mientras estaban haciendo su presentación, mandaron saludos de Ecuador, Honduras, Argentina, Perú, Chile, así que ya lo que nos han contado ha sido muy útil, también desde Argentina, muy útil para nuestra audiencia, y me gusta mucho el desafío que proponen ustedes, ¿no? Como el profesional de la información se se tiene que construir como un profesional que esté siempre al tanto de lo que está sucediendo. Y eso es un desafío en pandemia y para todos los profesionales. Así que les agradecemos mucho, Annette y Helen. Ya por ahí es de tarde y espero que tengan una buena tarde y agradecemos mucho que su presencia acá con nosotros y que hayan compartido este gran informe. Así que les deseamos lo mejor. Muchas gracias por su presentación. Adiós.
Thank you so much for having